is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
If you can have players that are naturally high basketball IQ and naturally pretty tough and competitive, you can really maximize their potential pretty quickly, in my mind.
Casey Kasperbauer is entering his first season as the head men's basketball coach at Upper Iowa University. Prior to Upper Iowa, Kasperbauer was an assistant coach for the University of South Dakota men's basketball team from 2018 to 2025. During his time with South Dakota, he served as offensive coordinator for 4 seasons, defensive coordinator for 1 season, and director of ops for 2 seasons. Kasperbauer also spent a season as a skills coach for Pure Sweat Basketball in Des Moines, Iowa, where he developed training programs for various skill levels. A 2016 graduate of the University of South Dakota, Kasperbauer was a 1,000-point scorer for the Coyotes and is USD's all-time leader in free throw shooting with a career percentage of 90.8%. He played professionally for BC Rustavi in the Republic of Georgia from 2016 to 2017, averaging 13.5 points per game. Hey, Hoopheads, Dr. Dish's 4th of July sale is here. From now until July 31st, 2025, you can save up to $4,000 on the top shooting machines chosen and trusted by thousands of coaches across the United States. Secure your Dr. Dish CT Plus, All-Star Plus, or Rebel Plus while supplies last. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Those are some great deals, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hey, this is James Leith from Unleash the Athlete, and you're listening to the Hoopheads podcast.
You'll want to take some notes to listen to this episode with Casey Kasperbauer, head men's basketball coach at Upper Iowa University. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here without my co-host Jason Sunkel tonight, but I am pleased to be joined by the new men's head basketball coach at Upper Iowa University, Casey Kasperbauer. Casey, welcome to the Hoopheads pod.
Thanks a ton for having me on, Mike, and shout out Brandon Ubel for connecting us as well.
Absolutely, no question. Thanks to Brandon. I always say to anyone who connects us to a new guest that good people always bring good people. So I'm excited to be able to have a similar conversation with you to the one that we were able to have with Brandon a couple weeks back. Let's start by, I think even before we go back to when you were a kid, let's maybe start with just the opportunity at Upper Iowa, and then we'll come back to it. But maybe just kind of give us the quick, short version of the opportunity, how it came to you, why you thought it was a good job, and then we'll kind of swing back to when you were a kid and then eventually work our way back to taking the job at Upper Iowa. But maybe just start off with sort of the how and the why.
Yeah, for sure. No, Brooks McCowan is the former coach here before me at Upper Iowa, and Brooks is a friend of mine and has been a friend for almost a decade now. When I got out of playing basketball, he was one of the first people I connected with, and he actually offered me a GA spot here about 15 years ago. So kind of starts there. And when I had heard his name being in the mix for other jobs, I just said, if you get another job, would you mind throwing my name out to the athletic director here at Upper Iowa? And he said, yeah, no problem. And from there, as it always does or seems to always happen, it moves so quickly that your head is spinning. So, it was a very quick process where the athletic director here, Rick Hartzell, he emailed me one night at about 9 or 10 p.m. and said, if you're interested in the job, call me tomorrow morning. I called him and he kind of told me what the job entails, asked me if I'd be interested. And next thing you know, I'm in the car and I'm heading to Fayette, Iowa. And then, to make a long story short, I wasn't necessarily looking to leave the University of South Dakota unless 3 boxes could be checked. And one was, a regional opportunity close to home. I'm actually from Iowa. So this checked that box. An opportunity to be a head coach because I have been chomping at the bit, to lead a program. So obviously that box was checked, and then an opportunity to win. I didn't want to just take any job. I wasn't, desperate by any means. And, that box was checked here. So pretty easy decision once I got offered the job, and I'm really excited to be here now.
Absolutely. All 3 of those things clearly make sense when you think about where you've been and where you are now and where you want to go. I think all 3 of those reasons make a lot of sense for you to jump and take this job. So we'll come back to and dive into it a little bit more in detail of what you've been doing since you took the job and the transition from assistant coach to head coach and what that's been like and just what you're looking forward to in the upcoming season. But let's circle back to when you were a kid and just tell me a little bit about how you got into the game of basketball.
Yeah, I was like many kids. I tried to go to every camp because camps are so fun when you're growing up and you're a kid and you get to be with your friends and just competing, playing 1-on-1 and 3-on-3, and you just be around. A lot of times you're going to college camp, so you're being around Iowa State basketball players or UNI basketball players, whatever the case may be. And I think really what opened my eyes to how good I could maybe be at playing the game is I was actually attending a camp in Carroll and noticed that I was, kind of winning some drills and having fun out there. And it was in 5th grade that I made the decision, I'm falling in love with the game. I feel like I'm progressing pretty well at the game, and there's an opportunity now to play club basketball for an AAU team. And from there, 5th grade on, I kind of just started to blossom with my career and fell more and more in love with the game. My dad coached me in everything, so I think that helped. Just I was around competition all the time too. So I played all the sports growing up. Everything that was kind of available to me, I tried. Soccer, track, baseball, basketball, football, everything, and it was basketball that I fell in love with first and got to be on this great AAU team around great teammates that are still friends. And that led to, opportunities to play basketball at the next level in college. And then really, like I said, it started in 5th grade when I decided to play AAU basketball. I've been in love with the game. It feels like since then.
Were you and your dad the GMs of the team?
No, that not quite. We didn't have that amount of juice just yet.
All right. So when it comes to your dad, obviously, if you spend a lot of time playing for him, he's clearly one of your major influences in your life, both as a player, but I'm sure shaping you in terms of how you think about coaching. So when you look back on that time spent with your dad and think about yourself as a coach, what's one or two things that you can point to that when you see yourself doing those things, or when you think about, hey, I do it this way, what are some things that come from your dad that you can kind of trace that line back to?
Yeah, it feels like, and I haven't thought about it too deeply, to be honest. That's a great question. The first thing when you asked that question I thought of was just his competitive edge. And again, it goes back to I was always around competition. He was the same way. But just that edge that you need to kind of, maybe for me, I guess specifically, I wasn't always the most athletic person, but I felt like I could gain an edge by just my refusal to lose. I thought my dad had that for sure as a coach. And that helped. And then just he was always around, and it's a credit to also the people that he worked with, the head coaches that he worked with in every sport, but just giving your players freedom. I think there's so much power to that where, I think the higher level you go, coaches want more control, but you hear it a lot. The really good coaches, the great coaches, all the former players talk about the amount of freedom that their coach gave them. And thought my dad was the same way. And again, the coaches that he worked with were the same way, where you felt empowered to be creative and use your imagination. And that's how real development happens in my mind.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I think that's a really fine line for especially young coaches to walk, right? Because
yes,
we can sit here on a podcast and talk about, hey, give your players freedom. And there's differing degrees or differing views of what freedom may or may not look like. And so I think I know I could speak back to when I was young, a long time ago, and just how difficult it was to be on the sideline and, as you said, sort of cede control of some of the decision making to the players, because you kind of feel like, I'm the coach. I should be able to control it. And of course, I grew up more in an era where there was a lot more of the my way or the highway type of coaching. And you're trying to navigate that, being able to allow your players to play free, because I'm sure you can relate to this, but when I was playing, or when I've been the parent of one of my kids and they're playing, I know I played better, my kids play better when you're not looking over your shoulder for every mistake that is the buzzer going to be going off and I'm going to be coming out of the game immediately. And you want to be able to maximize your opportunities when you get the chance to play in a system where you have the autonomy to be able to make the kinds of decisions and try things and just, again, bring out the best in what you can be as a player. And yet as a coach, I think that's something that it's really hard to define that, Casey, I guess is what I'm saying, and hard to figure out, how do I give the players freedom and yet still make sure that I'm getting them to do the things that I want them to do within the confines of that greater system, if that makes any sense. So how have you kind of walked that line?
Yeah, I mean, that is like you mentioned, that is the balance that you have to find as a coach. How I've walked the line, obviously I haven't always had control of the program until now. And so that's
right.
I think let's start there, because as you know, I mean, if you're an assistant coach, depending on who your boss is, you get so much freedom, or, vice versa. So, but I'm lucky enough, I've had really good bosses that I've worked for that have given me a lot of freedom. I think what it comes down to is you trust your eyes with recruiting. First of all, you recruited them for a reason. And so let's empower them to be creative and make plays. But you do have to give, I've always, or almost always, been on the offensive side of the ball. And it's important because there's a lot more gray on the offensive side of the ball, in my mind, where you should give them this is my opinion, you should give them a template to work from. And you give them the concepts and you help them understand, what does a really good possession look like? What are we emphasizing within our team structure? And then it's your job to go out there and let them play to their strengths. And if they're not doing that, especially early on, that's where the learning can take place, especially in terms of film studies. Nowadays, you have access to a camera pretty much all the time. And so you help them understand that way. But it's a fine balance, because games are won and lost, and then careers are, are on the line because you might have given somebody too much freedom. But yeah, I think it's important that your culture shines early on. And if you do empower the players long term with their development and within the team standpoint, if you empower your players early on, just giving them that freedom, everyone flourishes later on in your system.
It's almost like you work backwards, right? From the outcome. This is the outcome. As you said, this is the type of possession. This is what a good possession looks like. And then within the confines of the concepts that you're teaching, your players figure out what are the solutions that work for them to be able to get to the outcome that you ultimately want to achieve in a given possession or a given game, or however you want to look at it. And it's not easy to do. Like I said, I think that there's, you kind of look at it and say it's the art of coaching, right? There's some science to it, but there's also some feel to figuring out, what does that look like? What does that feel like when I'm on the sideline? What does that feel like for my players? And I know I asked you a black and white answer, but clearly there's no black and white answer to that question. It's gray area. And every coach, I think, has a slightly different approach to what freedom means to them, and then consequently what it means to their players, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's, you have to be consistent as a coach with what you're emphasizing. You can't, one day you want this and the next day you're looking for this, and then the players are so confused. Well, what does he actually want out of these possessions offensively? So it's almost like, in a way, it doesn't matter what you emphasize, but you have to be consistent with what that is. And then if you're a true program, in my mind, by the end of, guys' careers, they'll be able to coach the younger guys up, and this is what coach is looking for, because he's been consistent with his messaging. not that it can't, you can always make minor tweaks throughout the season, all that, but your main things that you want to emphasize, players are not stupid. They're going to pick up on those things, and you're going to be able to, you should celebrate the successful possessions and make sure people know, the players know, the staff knows this is not what we're looking for as well. But everyone's going to pick up on those cues. I think it's very important that you're consistent, though, with what you're emphasizing and teaching every day.
At the beginning of your coaching career, when you first transitioned from playing to coaching, how difficult was it for you when you stood on the sideline for the first time and you're watching a practice, or you're watching a game, or you're watching an individual player during practice? You're noticing tons of things maybe that you would do differently, or that you would maybe want to help the player correct. And then it goes back to what you're talking about, trying to emphasize the main things. And so as a coach, one of the things that I feel like it took me a long time to be able to understand was, I remember I've told this story on the podcast before, but I think it's worth repeating here. When I got my very first coaching job, I was coaching a JV high school basketball team. And I remember my very first practice. Now I walked in and it was just me, and I had never really coached anybody anywhere. And here I have 12 kids and we're doing a drill. And I remember after the first drill, just standing on the sideline thinking to myself, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like they just did like 500 things wrong in this one drill for 5 minutes. How am I possibly going to correct all these different things? And how am I going to even get through anything? Because I have to stop and I have to fix this. I have to fix this. I have to fix this. And I had to figure out, to your point, that you've got to understand, I think, as a coach, what you want to emphasize, what's important. And because otherwise you just are all over the place and it's so scattershot. So how did you have a similar experience? Did you think about just the transition from playing to coaching and trying to figure out, hey, how do I figure out what's important? And obviously as an assistant, it's a little different because you kind of take the cues from your head coach. But what do you remember about those first experiences as a coach?
Yeah, I remember I was very passive and maybe this wasn't the right way to handle it, but I tried to be such a good listener and a sponge and take it all in. Come in with the mindset that I have a lot more questions than I do answers, even though I probably did have a pretty strong opinion on a lot of things like you mentioned. But yeah, I do remember that first summer I was 24 years old or whatever I was when I was hired. And, you because it goes back to what you just mentioned about black and white. I just like you, I played the game a certain way. And at a certain point, you think, I was a guard, you think, well, all guards need to play this way. It's got to be cookie cutter, black and white. And you just have to stop yourself. And, this guy has different skill set than me. He's better at a lot of things. He's worse at some things. He's, whatever the case may be. And you have to stop yourself, and you got to really, I think, go home and think about it and really, really give it some thought about what was the most important thing there. And if the most important thing is getting your team a basket, for example, then I guess it doesn't matter how you get there, but that player has a specific skill set he's going to use, and let's help him along that way. But yeah, it was a lot of listening early on and just soaking it all in. I worked for a head coach who was my first head coach I worked for was, basketball wise, just a genius. And I tried to pick his brain about everything and just listen and then fill in the gaps as needed, but really pick his brain is what I was doing that first summer.
That's so important, I think, as a young coach, to be able to have somebody that you can look at and learn from right from the get-go, and be able to internalize some of those lessons earlier in your career so that you can take them with you as you continue to progress. I think that and when I've talked to lots of coaches here on the podcast, and so many of them are influenced by that first head coach that they work for, both in terms of their philosophy, in terms of just the things that, like you talked about a minute ago, what do we emphasize? What are the things that are important to our program? And just like anybody, it's kind of like the same way your parent has an impact on you when you're young, right? There's that imprinting stage where you kind of end up, you might think your parents are crazy, but eventually you probably end up kind of being somewhat similar to them because you spend so much time with them in your formative years. And I think coaching is similar in that way, that you kind of take the things from those head coaches that you work for, especially early on. Were you one of those guys that did you always know you wanted to coach when you were done playing, or were you just focused on being a player until all of a sudden you look around and you're like, hey, now I got to figure out what I'm going to be able to do to stay in the game, or were you always thinking coaching?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I wanted to always be around the game. And when I was going through it, especially early on in college, but then especially in high school, like many people, I was just going to play in the NBA forever. It was just going to be, yeah. And I was going to play in the NBA, and then I was going to be able to retire and sail off into the sunset. But I think it kind of hit me in the face maybe sophomore or junior year of college that my playing career was probably going to be short lived. And so what's next? And it was just such an obvious, I didn't have to think about it for very long. It was such an obvious choice for me. I was just going to try to go into coaching as soon as my playing career was over. I can't envision a scenario where I'm not around the game. And because, like I said, just being around my parents, my dad specifically was my coach and everything. And, but being around just sports all the time, it's all I knew. And so, I guess to answer your question, a little bit of both, where I didn't think about, what I wanted to do after playing forever. And then it was like 20, 21 years old. And it's like, okay, what's next? Easy decision. It's coaching.
Makes sense. What was the last sport you gave up before you went all basketball?
The last sport, is that what you asked?
Yeah. What's the last sport you gave up? Because you played everything. What was the last one that you gave up when you went all hoops?
Football. So I actually played football my senior year of high school, and I was a quarterback and a kicker. And so I think, in Iowa, baseball season is just the summer. And so I had to choose early on, was it going to be baseball or AAU basketball? So I really didn't have a decision there to make, but I really did enjoy baseball. I would have played that forever, I think, and as long as I could. But yeah, football for me.
Tell me about the decision to go to South Dakota. What was the recruitment like for you?
Yeah, so a little bit unique. I was recruited at a pretty high level freshman, sophomore year. High level meaning, I had Big 12 teams sniffing around, and I had Missouri Valley teams, ready to get me on campus for a visit. And then the summer going into my junior year, I broke my kneecap. Weird deal, just a scary, weird injury. I broke my kneecap the very first AAU tournament of the summer, and it put me out for basically 8 or 9 months, and my recruitment fell off. I mean, nobody really was talking to me for that whole year, and then going into I didn't have any offers, and the offers that I did have were basically pulled. The teams cut off communication, and at the end of it, it was just the University of South Dakota that had offered me a full scholarship, and a couple other teams that were, again, just sniffing around. But to me, it was all about going to school on a full scholarship to a team and a program that fully believed in me. So at the tail end of it, it wasn't hard because it was just the University of South Dakota. It was 2 hours and 30 minutes away from home. So that checked the box, first year of Division I postseason eligibility. So I could help lead the program through the transition. And that was the recruitment. And then my story gets really interesting because I stayed at USD for 4 years. This is probably what shapes a lot of my coaching too. But I stayed at USD for 4 years, but had 3 different head coaches in 4 years at the same institution. So easy choice to go to USD, easy choice to stay at USD, but definitely not. Definitely a very unique college career, I would say.
Do you think that opportunity, or what, maybe opportunity is not the right word, but do you think playing for 3 different head coaches, now when you look back at it, maybe it was a challenge as a player, but now as a coach being exposed to 3 different head coaches, 3 different systems, 3 different ways of doing things, do you think that's benefited you in your coaching career?
I would say I don't know what would be any more beneficial than that for me. Like when I look back on it, it's been the most beneficial thing for me to, and I'll go even further. 3 head coaches in 4 years. Then I play overseas for a year. So that's a 4th head coach. Then I come back and I have, a year in Des Moines where I do skill development. And then I get hired by a new head coach at USD. So I did the math, and I think I had 7 different head coaches that I worked for or played for in 12 years. And it totally has shaped my philosophy in terms of, I think people have coaching trees, which is great. And I do certainly have my network for sure that have helped me into this point in my career. But it's also been a unique case of I've just been able to pick apart all the great things from each coach. And essentially, I'm stealing the great things I've loved about the 7 head coaches in 12 years and pick those things up. And I've used that as my own philosophy. It's been so valuable to me because I've seen everything. I feel like, first coach I played for never played man-to-man defense. He was only zone defense, very, very old school, but all about relationships too. But, you talked right away about the old school, my way or the highway, very much that way. And then I've worked for a boss who's really just like hands off. We talk about freedom, like ultimate freedom guy, all about kind of raising money on the side as well. And then I've worked for everybody in between. And so it's been crucial in my development as a coach for sure.
As you were going through that, do you have a system that still is with you today in terms of preparing for, in most cases, guys are preparing for a head coaching job, but just writing things down? Are you a journaler? Do you have notebooks? Are you a technology, Google Drive, Evernote? What do you use to kind of collect all your coaching thoughts and materials that you've gathered throughout the time that you've been coaching?
Yeah, I wish I could say I'm a lot more organized than I actually am in real life, because I kind of have a hodgepodge of all of that. I do have a ton of journals, handwritten journals, notebooks, probably 10 to 20 notebooks that are at my house right now that have just been notes I've written since I've really started taking classes in college on coaching. And so that's probably the majority of the notes I've taken, but I also have Word documents in a folder on my hard drive that I've written just notes on podcasts I've listened to, or I'll be in the office working and I'll have a YouTube video up, and maybe that YouTube video is also a podcast, and I'm just I'm typing away notes as I'm hearing things or reading a book, and I'm handwriting notes on that. So it is like a Russian roulette of it's like I've got notebooks in every corner of the house, but I've also got hard drives. And so I've got a little bit of everything. But to your point, it's every coach I've worked for or played for that I've carried notes from. And then there's the professors that have taught me, Intro to Coaching Men and Women was the head track coach at USD. And basically the whole class was lessons of John Wooden. So it's been great, like I said, to just get my hands into kind of every philosophy I could find.
Being able to have as much experience with different coaches that like you've had, to me, I always think that is invaluable because, again, like I said earlier, it just provides you with so many different viewpoints of how to look at things and how you can get to the same end result doing it many, many different ways. And to your point, then you can pick and choose and take the best things from each person, the things that resonate with you. And now you can incorporate that into your own philosophy as you move forward. And especially here now, as you take over your own program. I want to ask you though about playing overseas. Tell me about just what you needed to do after you graduated. How'd you hire an agent? What did it look like finding a job? And then what was the experience like going over and playing in the Republic of Georgia?
Yeah, the agency process, I made sure, and I had gotten feedback from a lot of college coaches and mentors of mine that, who should I hire? And I knew, the NBA, the G League, that was probably out of the realm of possibility at that time. So the feedback I got from the people I asked was, go with more of a small time agent who doesn't represent 100 kids or people that are gonna, he's gonna sweep you under the rug, and you're gonna be option, 50 or 60 for him. So I got a smaller agent who was European, and so he only had, let's say, a handful or a dozen clients, and so he was always working for me, which I thought was great, making phone calls, and he presented a lot of opportunities to me. Honestly, I don't know if I made the right decision or not in terms of what the club that I went to or the country that I played in. All I know is, in September of 2016, the Republic of Georgia team called BC Rustavi called me and wanted me to join the team. And the contract was great. The league, from everything I had understood at that point, was a really good league and an opportunity for me to play, but also play on a winning team and a good league. And so I went to the Republic of Georgia, and actually my roommate at USD played on a different team in that same league about 30 miles away. That definitely helped. Just having that, comfortability there. If I ever need anything or he needed anything, we were 30 miles apart. But, the experience, it's Eastern Europe, and, it is, at times you have to create your own entertainment because the country it's a beautiful country, but there wasn't a whole lot to do. And English certainly wasn't the first language. So you had to get used to the culture and any language barriers there too, which was an awesome challenge and a great experience for me. But playing overseas, for me individually was really fun because I was on a really good team, and I did get to play, and I did play well. I made the All-Star game, and I won the 3-point competition and all that. And, finished my year. I did 10 months there and finished my year. And really what it came down to was I could have gone back. I had played well enough where I could have gone back to Europe and kept playing, but plethora of things happened. But mainly, my body was kind of starting to wear on me a little bit, and I did want to get into coaching. But definitely an awesome experience. And anybody who has that opportunity, I would highly recommend going overseas. You won't regret it. And even if you only do 1 year like me, it'll be, if nothing else, you'll have a bunch of stories to tell for the rest of your life.
All right. So to follow up on that, everybody who plays overseas, this is my standard question, Casey. What's your craziest PG-13 story from playing overseas?
Oh boy. Well, you tripped me up with the PG-13 because I think, okay, it's no. I don't know if this is. There's not one story to go along with this, but in the Republic of Georgia, in the town that I stayed in, which was Rustavi, there are, I don't know, let's say hundreds of stray dogs. Kind of like, where I'm in Iowa here, there's squirrels that kind of just run around campus here. It was like that. And so you'd walk out of, your apartment. I stayed in an apartment at the time, and there'd be dogs that sometimes they were hungry. And, if you had food in your hands, they would try to get the food from your hands. Or if you're in the gym late at night and you're walking back to your apartment late at night, you kind of had to walk. You kind of had to, try to be safe and look around every corner. And normally you're not looking around every corner for a dog. It's like, so you had to get used to that. There's no specific story to that other than, you would hear on the news, or, my Georgian teammates would tell me all the time, weekly, that, did you hear about the dog that attacked the human? And that was just such a unique thing that you had to be careful of. You don't think about things like that in a different country, that you have to look out for stray dogs. But there were a ton of stray dogs in my town.
Well, I have never heard that one. So that is a new one on me, Casey. I like it. And certainly, that could certainly be disconcerting as you're walking with your peanut butter and jelly sandwich as you walk out of your apartment and you're carrying it, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a dog at your side trying to get it away from you. So I get it. Yeah, I think just to go back to what you said earlier about the opportunity to play overseas, I do think that anybody who gets an opportunity that I've ever talked to that has had the chance to go and play basically echoes the same sentiment that you just shared, that the opportunity to immerse yourself in a different culture, and whether it's a different language, a different food, just living in a different place, the way that you're able to grow from that and the experiences that you get, I think are completely invaluable. And then the other thing that I think is interesting that you mentioned just when you talked about the fact that you felt like your body was kind of breaking down. It was getting tough for you to be able to continue to play. And you think, okay, here you are, 23 years old. And then you think about some of these guys that play, whether it's overseas or play in the NBA. Obviously, the all-time leader in the clubhouse is LeBron. And just to be able to do the things that guys who are playing professionally for 15 seasons, I mean, you kind of take it for granted. I mean, I had a 4-year college career, and I would have loved to have been able to keep playing. It didn't happen for me, but I just think about the grind that it was to play 4 years of Division I basketball, and then the idea of throwing in all the travel with playing professionally, and then obviously in Europe, the way you're traveling and just everything that goes along with it. I think there's a lot of guys that sort of had the same sentiment that you did, that this is fun. I'm glad I did it. Man, I'm feeling like I'm beat up, and it may be time to get on to the real world.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it just makes everything, when you go through it, it makes everything that guys like LeBron and Steph, older guys in the NBA, how they've sustained excellence, makes it so much more impressive, because everything has to be next level. Like your love for the game has to be over the top. Your physical fitness has to be over the top. The resources that you pour into your recovery have to be over the top. And then your luck, honestly, too, has to be, you have to get really lucky to be in a situation where you can play for that long. But, it's, I mean, a different livelihood. I understand that they're living to be able to, afford the things that they're afforded to have with, as far as recovery goes. But so impressive that guys like that have been able to keep playing at such a high level.
It really is unbelievable when you consider, again, what the body has to go through in order to be at their best. And then not only just to be able to play, first of all, and forget about how well you're playing, right? It's one thing to just be able to say, okay, I'm going to go out and be able to run up and down the floor. It's another thing to be at the level that these guys are at, into the, well into their 30s. In LeBron case, in his case, into their 40s. It truly is incredible.
Coaches, you've got a game plan for your team, but do you have one for your money? That's where Wealth for Coaches comes in. Each week, we'll deliver simple, no-fluff financial tips made just for coaches. Whether you're getting paid for camps, training sessions, or a full season, Wealth for Coaches helps you track it, save it, and grow it. It's time to stop guessing and start building. Subscribe now at wealthforcoaches.beehive.com/subscribe and follow us on Twitter @wealthforcoaches for daily money wins. Your money needs a coach. Start with Wealth for Coaches.
All right, let's shift gears to the start of the coaching career. So you get done playing, you come back to Iowa, and you spend a year working with Pierce Sweat, doing a lot of player development stuff. Talk to me about the value that you gained from that year working player development, and just how that's impacted you moving forward as a coach.
Yeah, if I look back on it, it's really the value in hustling, to be honest, because I got the freedom to kind of, use Pure Sweat Basketball's template in terms of what they're doing. But it was on me to put myself out there with marketing and getting the clients and the players. And that's why I say hustling was the most important thing I learned, because, it's all on you to make the money. I could have been hired by them and had 2 clients, and I'm making nothing and I'm not really helping anybody. But what I learned is kind of is recruiting, like you send emails, you go to high schools, you try to work with whoever will accept you, and you have to try to sell it too. You have to sell the fact that this is your resume, and this is what you did. But then the other part is, for me, I was living in the Des Moines area, and the value of, like, I was driving to a town that was 45 minutes away at 5:30 in the morning, because I had 5 I had 5 people at a high school east of Des Moines that wanted to work out before school. And then I'd come home and I'd eat my breakfast, and then I'd go the other direction an hour and a half sometimes, and I'd be in the gym during while school was in session. I had to wait till school was over. So, 3:30 was my first group all the way up until 9:30. And then I'm not getting home till 11 o'clock at night, and I got to do it again. I'm waking up at 4:30. So there was just so much value to me. And like, you realize very quickly how in this college, high school coaching world, and I understand in a lot of other professions too, how sometimes this is what it is. You have to be available at these times. Sometimes it's a Sunday night or a Sunday morning or whatever the case may be. But yeah, like I mentioned, it's just, I learned right away how hard you got to hustle and how hard you got to work to be able to, a lot of times be really successful in the industry.
Do you always think that college coaching was where you wanted to end up? Was there ever any thought of going into high school coaching, maybe going back and getting a teaching license? What was your thought process in terms of long-term where you wanted to take your coaching career?
No, I kind of thought about it in the same sense that I thought about playing, where, I wanted to play in the NBA. I just kind of wanted to coach at the highest level. So I got lucky, of course, that I was hired at a Division I at age 23, 24 years old. But I guess that was my thought process. I didn't really have to try to think too hard about high school coaching, because this college coaching opportunity came about, pretty early on in my career. So since then, I've just kind of I wanted to coach the highest level of player I could. I wanted to lead, and I wanted to just be around basketball all day, every day. So college coaching, you kind of get that.
What was it like going back to your alma mater and stepping behind the coach's office door from a place where you had played, you had so much experience in a program? Obviously, you played for a bunch of different coaches, so it's not like you didn't step back in and work for your former head coach, but you did still step behind the coach's door office. What was that like, being on the other side of it? And then how do you think that helped you in that first couple of years? Obviously, once you're there for a little bit, you kind of get adapted and whatever. But in your first couple of years, how do you feel like it helped you to have been a player in the program previously?
Yeah, when I took the job, it truly felt like a dream come true. And I spent 7 years there on staff, and it really did feel like a dream come true to be back at my alma mater and to truly work my way up in terms of job title and responsibility and all that. That part was great. I thought I was valuable in terms of I knew what I had fun with at USD as a player, and how I could translate that to recruiting success, if that makes sense. And I think I got to wear that hat a lot when we had recruits on campus, where I could tell them, there's not a lot of programs that have former players on their staff. And so I could sell that in terms of, this was my experience as a player, and this was, this is where you can flourish in the community, on the campus. The fans love you, whatever the case may be. And then on the flip side of it, to the current players, I could share my experience as well, and because I did have some individual success as a player at USD, and I could share that with the players. Like, you can be not just a successful college player, you can be a successful player here at USD, and here are some tips and tricks and kind of what I learned along the way. So those first 2 years when I could actually still get up and down the floor too, I think it did help, the players on the team see that there's a member of the staff that, played college basketball, played at USD, and can still kind of play every now and again. So I really enjoyed, wearing that hat, especially early on.
Tell us about how your role changed over the time that you were there. You come in as the Director of Opps, and then, as you said, you slowly work your way up the staff. But just tell us a little bit about what you did in each one of the roles that you had while you were there.
Yeah, I'm super grateful for this because I got to wear every hat. I was hired as director of basketball operations, and most everything I did was the behind the scenes stuff. But again, it was great, especially now in the chair I'm sitting in, where I got to handle, the budget. I got to handle team travel. I got to handle video editing, video coordinator responsibilities. The staff at USD had 3 assistants and the director of operations at the time. So the director of operations handled basically, you hear people joke about the other duties as assigned. I was basically that. Like I was other duties as assigned every single day. And it was great. I did that for 2 years. And like I said, the team travel, the meals, the hotels, the ground transportation, I booked airfare. I did all of that stuff. I did the budget. All that stuff was great. And then what I learned is if you knock all that stuff out and you do a great job with that, then the head coach will start to entrust you with other things and will slowly start to ask for your opinion on basketball things. And so you learn that too. Like if you really do a great job with the things you're assigned, you're going to be given other things. And then that's when you start to gain a little bit of, some momentum. And so I did that for 2 years. I got bumped up to assistant after 2 years. And that first year I was a full-time assistant. I was actually on the defensive side of the ball. And that was the only year that I was ever doing defensive scouts. But I have so many notes from that year because of how detailed my head coach was with defensive scouts. And like I said, he was a genius with basketball. I mean, it was like basketball 101 every single day. So I got to do the defensive side of the ball for a year. And then I got to do the offensive side of the ball for a year for him as well. And so I got to do kind of literally for my first head coach that ever hired me, Todd Lee. He gave me everything. I mean, I literally got to work my way up from all the other duties as assigned to both defense and offense. And then I was super lucky because then the new head coach came in, Eric Peterson, who's currently at USD, and I just stayed on the offensive side of the ball. And fast forward 3 years, and here I am.
It's amazing how when you look at the progression of a career and you try to think about what's the best way to learn and prepare yourself for that next step along the journey. And I think you hit on a very important point that we've tried to emphasize in a lot of the interviews here on the pod. And that is that you've got to do an outstanding job in whatever the job is that you currently have. You may, in the back of your mind, have your eye on the next thing, but if you want to be successful, you better make sure that you are doing all the things that you are supposed to do. And let's be frank, Casey, right? Going above and beyond the things that you're being asked to do and looking for even more ways that you can add value. And when you do that and you do the job that you currently have well, that tends to be when those other opportunities are presented to you, whether those are, in your case, for a number of years on the same staff, or whether that means that you may get an outside opportunity because somebody that you've worked for will vouch for you, recommend you, whatever the case may be, because you've done great work in the position that you're in. I think that's one piece of great advice for young coaches out there is making sure that you get the job done that you have and not worry about, hey, what's coming next, especially when you think about, again, if you're taking a job and, a lot of guys start out in volunteer positions or they start in jobs that aren't as well paying. And so you're looking around dreaming, going, man, I wish one day I'm going to get a bigger paycheck. And you got to just keep remembering that you got to do the job that you're in. And when you do the job and you're in, you do it well, that's going to afford you some new opportunities. And obviously that was the case for you starting out in the director of ops. And then, as you said, you kind of work your way up. And, you're one of the things that I always think is interesting with the ops position is, you think about how much you love the game of basketball, and most people who are getting into coaching have a similar feel for the game. And yet there's a case where you don't even really get to get on the floor and coach basketball with the players. You're doing, as you said, all those behind the scenes things. And that always seems to me like, yeah, it'd be fun and you'd be into it, but man, it'd be a kind of a tough way to
start your coaching career not really being on the floor coaching. How'd you handle that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is 100% correct in terms of like be a star in your role, and then you're going to get, you know, you'll get your break eventually. But the other thing, to answer your question and to your point, is you don't necessarily have to love it, all the time. You just have to do the job. You're not gonna.
Right.
So that's how I handled it. Is like you almost had to trick yourself a lot of times. Like you wake up and your jobs are, I have to book this hotel. I have to call the sports information director and make sure that the interview for this player is moved to a certain day. And, I have to make sure that the pregame meal is on time. Well, those things aren't fun because, you don't wake up and you're not super motivated to do that, but you almost have to trick your brain into, I'm going to crush this. I'm going to do as good of a job as I possibly can. And then if I have, an hour at the end of my day, then I'm going to share with my boss some thoughts on a recruit that I watched that he didn't ask me to watch, but I did it anyways because that's how I can chip away at this thing. And there were so many lessons I learned in that. And honestly, Mike, you can really relate that to a lot of players in their role. Only one player can be the best player on the team. Only one player can be the leading scorer. But if you want to be the leading scorer, but what we want right now is for you to be, what we need for our team is for you to be the best cutter on the team. Well, then be the best cutter on the team. And if you're a star in your role and then you get to cutting and you cut all the time, well, then this offseason we'll work on your scoring ability because you've proven that you can you can perform tasks at an elite level. And then maybe you can be our best scorer after that. But in every walk of life, I think that's probably the key thing is you don't have to always love what you're doing or love the work that you're putting in, but go knock it out. And then people are going to notice, and then you're going to be called on to do the things that maybe you're more passionate about.
That is the ability, I think, to be self-aware, right? You have to know who you are, and you have to know what you are in the moment. And oftentimes, and I'll think about this both as a player and as a coach, we think of ourselves in a certain way, and somebody else thinks of us, or our title allows us to do certain things. And if we fight back against those things because we have a different image of ourselves, or we don't think that we think that role is below us, whether it's, again, on the floor as a player or on a staff as a coach, that becomes very, very obvious when somebody is disgruntled with their role, and we could take it far beyond basketball, coaching staffs. Just think about the business world, think about in a family, whatever it might be. And I do think that the ability to be self-aware and understand that, yes, maybe I would rather be doing X, but right now my job is to do Y. And so I need to make sure that I'm doing Y to the absolute best of my ability. And I think that's really great advice for coaches on a staff. And I think from a playing standpoint, and again, this is something that I've talked to a bunch of coaches about, Casey, is, there's just the idea of, and you talked about it, hey, we need you to do this on this team. This is your role. This is what we need you to do. We need you to be the best cutter on the team. And the higher the level of basketball that you go up, the more almost specialized your skill has to be. It's kind of counterintuitive. And I've said this before, but Mike Procopio, he was the Dallas Mavericks player development guy, and he worked with Kobe Bryant. And he was the first one that sort of raised this to me, saying that when he works with guys at the back end of an NBA roster, you're basically working on one or two skills that are going to keep you in the league. Like, these are the best guys in the world, and they've been stars throughout their entire career. And now if they want to stick in the NBA, you just have to be able to make corner threes at a 42% clip. and you're going to stick in the league. And all the rest of your skills, yeah, we can keep working on them, but you got to be able to do this one thing at an elite level. And it's kind of counterintuitive because then you think, what do we do with youth players, right? We want to have them we want to teach them every skill. You think it would be the opposite. Like if you don't really, if you stop and you're like, well, the NBA players probably are working on every single thing, and maybe the youth player only has to be good at one thing. No, it's kind of the opposite, just in terms of, how players develop. And so it's interesting. There's so many different ways to look at developing as a player and developing as a coach. And obviously there's guys who get into coaching like you, who start at the Division I level, started an ops job or started a GA job, and they're part of a huge staff. And then we talk to other guys who start at the D3, or they started JUCO, or they started NAI, and they're kind of thrown in the fire. And they're, not only are they doing all the things that you were doing at South Dakota, but then they're coaching on the floor. And again, it's just, there's all different ways into the coaching profession. But I think bottom line is you got to excel in whatever it is that you're doing. And if you do, then that's going to afford you whatever that next opportunity might be.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I mean, your story about NBA players is exactly right. And it's the ones, I feel like the stories that you hear about the players that stick in the league, they just don't get in their own way. They're just, and you hear them talk about it in interviews, or, they're at a camp and they're talking about it. Like what this team needed from me this season was to just set a ball screen and roll and protect the rim as a big guy. That's all I needed. And I can score on the block and I can post up, and that's probably why I got drafted, but that's not what the team needed this year. And it's on the flip side, it's those players that are out of the league pretty quickly because they fight that. And I think you can look at every level, and every coach that you could ever talk to will have a story on both sides where this guy wasn't as talented, but we told him all he really was a cutter for us, and he needed to guard the best player. And he's like, yep, coach, sounds good. And we had a super high level talent that we told him he's our sixth man, and he said, no, I'm a starter. And so he left the team, and I never heard from him again. And so, I mean, it's everything we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes about this, but it's so true. I mean, I think players might think it's a very cliche thing for coaches to say, but coaches do have favorites, and it's the ones that are going to sacrifice whatever they think they should be doing for what the team needs most.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, that when I think about a player and a coach having a conversation about role, and I think about the normal experience for a player, right? On any given team, there's one best player. And even that one best player on most teams, the coach doesn't just hand that player the ball and say, hey, man, go ahead, do whatever you want, do your thing. Now, there are guys that are capable of that. There are guys even at the NBA level that are capable of that. But I would argue that not every NBA team has a guy that the coach just gives them the ball and trusts implicitly to do everything. And most guys are going to be in a role. And so therefore you got to figure out, like you said, what does the team need me to do? And there are guys who figure that out at the college level, at the high school level, at the pro level. And those are the guys that stick around. And the guys that fight it, the guys that still fancy themselves as the, hey man, just give me the ball and let me do my thing. Those guys don't always last because, again, a team can't be made up of five guys who think it's, hey man, give me the ball and get out of the way and let me do my thing. That doesn't translate to winning basketball at any level. Let's put it that way.
No, it doesn't. And to relate this to coaching too, that's my job as a coach. That's coach's job too. That, you can't help every player realize that, but to an extent, you have a responsibility to try to get players to understand how their role, you might not love your role right now, but your role, this could be what it ends up if you are a star in your role. So I do think, coaches have a role in this too, in terms of, if they're fighting you, well, maybe you need to try something different. Or have you tried showing them? Have you tried, asking them? Have you tried, or are you just, we talk about the my way or the highway, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that, but maybe the my way or the highway won't work for a certain player, and are you just going to move on from that player and not give him another chance? Or can you find other ways to reason with him and help him understand, this, you might not be happy with your role, but your role is very much needed. And if you're really good in this role, you could be the MVP, like you just never know. You never know what could happen.
I think that goes to, as a coach, knowing your players and getting to understand that not every single person is motivated. Not every single person can be pushed in the same way. Like, everybody needs different buttons to be pushed, to be motivated in certain ways, to be pushed, to be coached. And it's not a cookie cutter approach. And I think the best coaches figure out, how do I communicate with this player to get the most out of that player, as opposed to, hey, we're just all going to do it this same exact way. And I think the best coaches get to know their players, both as players, but also as human beings. And that helps them to be able to get the best out of them. And that's not easy to do. I mean, it's not easy to do, but I think the best coaches do it really well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you hit the nail on the head with, you can't use the same approach to every player. It's very important that you get to know your players so that you can understand, not going to get it right every time, but you can understand, this is how I need to approach this conversation with this player. And I have to have the exact same conversation with this player, but it's got to go a totally different direction with how I start this conversation. Or, you know what I mean? Like, and I think certain levels, players are at different stages of their career, and they've had every role on the team. So that conversation looks a little bit different from the freshman who's coming in and is eager and wide-eyed. And that conversation might hurt a little bit more, whatever the case may be. But it's the tricky part of this profession, but it's also the really fun challenge, because on the flip side of everything we've been talking about, when you get that player that buys in to their role and you watch them flourish in it, and then they're happy, and then you're winning games and their minutes are going up, there's really not too many greater feelings as a coach.
No, that's good stuff, without question. I mean, I think being able to have that impact and seeing players have success, and then obviously if you have individual player success, that's going to lead to team success. All right, let's talk about taking over at Upper Iowa and what you've been doing since you got hired in April. What's been the most fun part of taking over your program? Obviously, you haven't coached a game yet, but what have you enjoyed the most about being a head coach?
I've really enjoyed just getting to wear all the hats, and it's a lot of work for sure. There's a lot of work that goes into it, but to be able to make, you're making the decisions now. You're not just suggesting, and there's some fun in making suggestions too. But like I mentioned early on, I was chomping at the bit to be the decision maker in all this, and so it's been just a lot of fun with making the decisions within our team. I mean, every decision is going through my desk, and that's been fun. And then the other thing, and probably even more fun and more enjoyable than that, is getting to know everybody on the team. It's tricky because at the Division II level, you can't mandate that anyone's on campus for the summer. And I basically took the job at the end of the spring. And so I haven't been able to get a whole lot of FaceTime with players because they're back home. But some of them are in town, and then it's just a lot of, old school, like get on the phones and just call people and get to know them. And so I've gotten to know what makes everybody tick on the team and what motivates them and their stories. And that's been a lot of fun for me. It's, that part hasn't changed. I'm always trying to get to know the players that I'm coaching, but that's why a lot of coaches get into it. That's definitely why I'm in coaching, is just to be transactional as possible or transformational as possible, and get to know everybody and get to know their stories.
When you were having those conversations, as you're getting to know them, obviously they're having to get to know you, right? A new head coach comes in, players, and I'm sure you can relate to this, right? Players are always nervous. Like, okay, I kind of had established myself with the previous head coach. I kind of knew where I stood. Some players maybe are excited that a new guy's coming in because maybe they didn't have as good a standing. Some guys are a little nervous because they were returning starters or whatever the case may be. Everybody's trying to get to know you. So in addition to getting to know your players, how did you want to help them to get to know you? What were some of the things that you tried to get across to them about you and what you were going to do with the program?
I basically just wanted to be an open book right away. And I told them that right away that, I am an open book. I really don't hide anything about, who I want to be as a coach and what I value. And so I thought they noticed right away that I was pretty vulnerable about, I just told them the honest truth about why I took the job. And I told them honestly, what I'm trying to get, what type of players I'll try to add to the program. I made sure they knew nobody's spot was in jeopardy. I'm not going to ask anybody to hit the transfer portal. I'm really not going to strip anybody's financial aid agreements up. I was sensitive to the fact that every coach could say that. And so I had to also prove that, and that I was about relationships, and I did want to know them and their family, and, what their life has been up to this point. I thought that was the biggest contributor to, them just feeling that safety net that, I'm going to share with you everything that I am as a coach and what I'm about. And you guys are all good. You guys are all safe here. And then let's figure out what you want your experience to look like, because this is my vision of the program. And if it doesn't align, then we can go our separate ways. But if we can find some alignment here, I'd love to have all of you guys a part of it. I thought that was big. And I've just been trying to communicate that all summer and re-communicate that every chance I can. Getting them on team Zoom calls has been important, just to make sure they knew, I'm still the same person I was when I took the job. That wasn't a sales pitch. That this is me. And I am about relationships. I'm trying to be as transformational as possible every day. And so I think that's certainly helped with hopefully everyone, but I know a good majority of the players.
Clearly, that outward communication with your players is critically important to get them to understand what you're all about, helping yourself to understand what they're all about, and beginning to put together the outline of what your team's going to look like. What are the things that you've been doing behind the scenes that nobody besides maybe you and your staff have seen that you feel are going to have the biggest impact as you head towards the season?
Well, trying to get our players as many resources as we can through raising money. I think that's a big thing. Probably no one knows is, the amount of work I'm trying to put in terms of getting that stuff done. I mean, every institution in the country will tell you they wish they had a little bit more. And so I'm trying to do that. And then the obvious one, so that's the first thing, just trying to get our players in, better situations, resource wise. And then the obvious one is just recruiting. The class of 2026, they're starting to make decisions. So getting ahead on 2027s as well has been important, and just trying to, the format and the template's kind of already in place here in terms of recruiting locally as much as possible, and trying to maybe dabble with some international flavor as well. But, that's an every day, as you know, Mike, every day, all day, 24/7, you're trying to find the best fits for your program.
When you think about, obviously there's a certain level of talent that a player needs to be able to have to play at your level. What are some things from an intangible standpoint that are the types of players that you feel like are going to have success playing for you as a head coach and playing in your program?
It's pretty obvious, because every coach will tell you this, but toughness. I really love. I think you can be very limited with athletic ability or size, but if you're really tough, I think you can overcome a lot of things. With toughness comes, a competitive edge. Competition, you got to love it, because we will compete with everything. And if you don't love competition, it's going to be really hard for you to play. And I think that's anywhere, any good program. but the other one would be high basketball IQ, because we are going to be a pretty complex team. Now there's going to be some simplicity, especially offensively, with allowing you to be the player that you're capable of being or that you are currently. But high basketball IQ, I think that's what every coach, I mean, in my 7 years coaching basketball so far, we get to January, the staff that I'm a part of, we get to January, February, and we just want guys that we can trust to make the right decision. And I think, a lot of it comes with how you're structuring practice for sure, and how what the players do with their off-season development. But if you can have players that are naturally high basketball IQ and naturally pretty tough and competitive, you can really maximize their potential pretty quickly, in my mind.
I think being able to identify those two traits on the recruiting trail and bringing guys into your program that already have those things in place make it so much easier when you build on them right in practice, when you build in a competitive practice environment. If you already have competitive dudes on your team, it makes that competitive practice even more effective. If you have guys that you bring into your program with a high IQ, and now you're asking them to make reads and make decisions and giving them the freedom that we talked about earlier, now suddenly you're sort of doubling down on the strengths of those two intangibles. So I think that those two things, when you look at trying to bring guys who are competitive and guys who have a high basketball IQ into your program, and then you're obviously taking that and trying to compound it and trying to grow it by the way that you structure the practices, the way you structure your team dynamics, all that kind of stuff makes it a case where you're just, it's almost like, compound interest, right? There's returns there, but then there's that 10 times return, where if you have somebody who already has those traits and then you put them in an environment where those traits can flourish, that's when you really have something without question.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And just to add to that too, I think if you're tough and you're smart, you can almost trick yourselves and the opponents into thinking you're a lot more athletic than you are, because you're not hesitating. You're just like, it's right now. You trust your instincts. You trust your competition. You trust your competitive edge, and you trust the fact that you know the game. And so I think, and I've seen it before, where guys that are just really hardworking, tough dudes, competitive dudes who are smart, they're going to cover ground more quickly, because they're not thinking. They can look like a freak athlete out there at sometimes, because it's like right now they've made the decision and they're at the point that they need to be.
What's it going to look like in the fall when your guys get back on campus? How are you going to go about getting them together? What's the plan for the fall preseason?
Yeah, sorting through that right now. I think the more research I do and reaching out to other coaches, the more, coaches I trust that have had a lot of success, and listening to podcasts, honestly, what can translate to success quicker is letting them play a lot early on and figure out what I've got. You get an idea. You get an idea in your head of how you want to play and what each individual will bring to the table when you're recruiting. And then when you're watching film and all of that, you can get a pretty good sense of what everyone's going to bring to the table, but you might not have it 100% figured out. So in my mind right now, we try to play as much as we can. And it's not just open gym. I think a lot of people get that confused, but it's, small sided games or advantage, disadvantage games, or 3-on-3 on one side of the court, or whatever the case may be, putting them in tons of situations where they're competing and playing. That also establishes your culture of competition. But then you can see what everyone's about, what they bring to the table, and who's good at what, who's maybe not so good at what. And so I'm kind of I'm thinking about reverse engineering. A lot of people go 1-on-0 to start and just make sure everything looks good and looks cool, and you're driving home and you're happy because no one made a mistake. I kind of want to do the opposite of that and watch everyone, help people along, but let them make mistakes and let them just be in competition and see what everyone can bring to the table. And then and then strip it back from there and figure out what we can break down after that.
So who's competitive and who has a high basketball IQ, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Might as well be consistent.
Let's figure it out, right? Let's figure it out right from the get-go. All right. Final two-part question here, Casey. When you look ahead over the next year or two, obviously being the head coach for the first time at a new program, there's going to be some challenges ahead of you. What do you think are going to be, what's your biggest challenge over the next year or two? And then second part of the question, when you think about what you get to do every single day as a college basketball coach, what brings you the most joy? So your biggest challenge and then your biggest joy.
Yeah. The challenge is, I'm a young first-time head coach, and so I'm eager, and I want, the team to be good at everything. So the challenge is, how can we avoid emphasizing everything? The old saying, like, if you emphasize everything, you're really emphasizing nothing. And so the biggest challenge to me is figuring out what we're about, the 2 to 4, however many handful of things that we're really going to emphasize. And that's what we talk about every single day. And maybe those other things, and people would argue, well, what if you're not good at this? You didn't emphasize it. Well, then that's okay, because we're going to be great at the other things. We're going to be great at the things we're going to emphasize. So the challenge, to me personally, is avoiding trying to be good at everything, and then you're sacrificing and you're just average at everything. So that would be the biggest challenge. And you said joy is the second part of this question, correct?
Yes.
I think the biggest joy I've had out of this whole experience as a coach is just watching a player stick with it and get through it. And I think it's important to watch them go through all their phases of development, where they get frustrated, they get upset, and maybe this goes to their role too, that where they might be a little bit upset, but they stick with it, they stick to it. And you watch them go through all the phases of their development in their career. And in 2 years' time, they're a different player and they're a different person and they're a different teammate. And that's, to me, in this business so far, that's what's given me the biggest joy, is cultivating that relationship with the player where they can trust me to help them with their development, and then watch them go through it all and work at it and work at it and work at it. And then they leave and they're just a totally different person and player.
Being able to have an impact with the game of basketball. I always say that when I think about what coaching is all about with anything that I've ever done, whether I'm coaching a team, whether I'm working with an individual player, whether I'm doing camps, it's all about, can you use the game of basketball, which we love, to be able to have an impact on the people that we're coming in contact with. And you said that very eloquently and in such a way that, again, clearly what you're trying to do is have an impact on the players that are part of your program, both as basketball players, but even more importantly, helping them to grow as human beings. Before we wrap up, Casey, I want to give you a chance to share, how can people get in touch with you, whether you want to share social media, email, website, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then after you do that, I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
Yeah, for sure. I think the easiest, best way to get in touch with me is just my email address. I think if you don't know how to spell my very long last name, I'm pretty sure it's on the Upper Iowa men's basketball website. But just email me, Kasperbauer, c@uiu.edu, and I usually do a pretty good job responding. And obviously, I love connecting, so would love to connect with anyone who's out there listening.
Perfect. Feel free to reach out to Casey. Cannot thank you enough, Casey, tonight for taking the time out of your schedule. Really appreciate it. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Your first impression is everything when applying for a new coaching job. A professional coaching portfolio is the tool that highlights your coaching achievements and philosophies, and most of all, helps separate you and your abilities from the other applicants. The Coaching Portfolio Guide is an instructional, membership-based website that helps you develop a personalized portfolio. Each section of the Portfolio Guide provides detailed instructions on how to organize your portfolio in a professional manner. The guide also provides sample documents for each section of your portfolio,
that you can copy, modify, and add to your personal portfolio. As a Hoopheads Pod listener, you can get your coaching portfolio guide for just $25. Visit coachingportfolioguide.com/hoopheads to learn more.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.